Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on POT TV. And today we have a wonderful panel for you. Of course, our regular Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Sasha.
Always great.
Good to be here.
Now we have also Dr. Steve Rao. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Is aspiring politician who is.
I'm not a doctor, but I got a master's in BS. Thank you.
You play a good doctor on TV.
But no, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm only here for a few minutes, but it's a pleasure to be here today, Sasha. And I'm here to provide you any insight just in terms of Ukraine and most importantly, to learn from you and Dr. Lockwood.
Okay, thank you. And we have also Nick Poliveda, founder of this network. Nick, welcome to the show.
I'm only going to be here also for a little while, Sasha.
So okay, great.
I'm packing to go to Madrid.
Great. Unfortunately, we don't have our regular Ivan from Kiev with his wonderful videos, but he will be back on Friday. So, Steve, let's start with you because you announced that you're going to run very soon. Good.
Well, I think my analysis today is that, first of all, we know that I didn't really prepare for today, but we know that Bakhmut is being looked upon as, kind of like this play for Bakhmut, which is really more symbolic because I think Zelensky's made it clear that he doesn't want the Russian flag standing in any area of Ukraine. And I really want to commend the President Zelensky for continuing to fight hard for Ukrainian democracy. I think the United States is continuing to provide support, which I do support. In local news networks here in North Carolina, I've been asked, why would we want to support this when we're not supporting other domestic causes in the midst of inflation, housing prices, banking crisis, and now like Silicon Valley Bank, although there's no proof that that's going to spread to other banks. But my answer is that I think it's important for us to fight for democracy, that this, I think, in my opinion, is the most important war since World War II. I think the entire rules-based international system we've had in place since World War II is at stake here. And if Russia is successful, then, it's not going to prevent another country from invading another smaller country, whether it's China and Taiwan or, Turkey invading Syria. And other authoritarian regimes, what we've talked about. We just had a show on Nigeria, So my only final insight, though, and I asked you this question yesterday, is at what point does the war become a zero-sum game? And what I mean by that is that Russia is destroying its economy, although it's doing better than it was because they've managed to survive the sanctions by working with non-Western countries like India, China, and Iran. So I do believe that until we cut Putin off from oil, he's going to keep doing this, even if he obliterates the entire Russian people. Their military is weaker than we thought, it looks like. But with Ukraine winning, even if they win the war, they're going to have their country completely decimated. So at what point do we look at a deal where we would have Crimea and Donbass in exchange for NATO membership? Or is this utopian fantasy that will never happen? Now, you guys are the experts, but I don't like scorched earth wars where at the end of the day, will there be a winner? I mean, I'm getting ready to see the Creed. My final insight is getting to see Creed 3 on Friday with my son and his friends. And will this be like the end of Rocky 2, where they both were hanging on the ropes and Rocky won, but did he really win that fight because he didn't even know he was standing? He was stumbling around unconscious, right? That's my concern with this war. So that's my insight for today.
Jonathan, please address that.
Well, Steve, you remind me of what King Pyrrhus of Epirus once said after a particularly costly victory. Again, he was being congratulated on his victory over the Romans, but it was a particularly costly victory. And he was quoted as saying, "If the gods see fit to grant us another such victory, we are undone." and that is very much what this Russian-Ukrainian war is more and more resembling a potential Pyrrhic victory for whoever comes out on top. And even if, as I anticipate that Ukraine will eventually emerge victorious, it will nevertheless be a very costly victory. Uh, they are not so much I would differ with you slightly, Steve, in that the Ukrainians are not so much fighting for democracy as they are for a feature of it, the freedom for self-determination. They do not want the Ukrainians, at the very least, do not want their future determined by Russia. And even though should they emerge victorious, there will be a long process of economic reconstruction in Ukraine and in building the foundation for a stable democracy. And ideally, if they were to emulate the United States, which would be the ultimate goal, to freedom for having a constitutional republic, which is a very specialized form or a more enlightened form of democracy, complete with checks and balances. That would be a long way off for Ukraine. But in the process of doing it, they will at least be able to determine their own future and hopefully rebuild their economy with the help of the West. As for Russia, uh, I would say that the best post-war policy we would have for them would be uh, more or less benign containment, keep them from engaging in further aggression. And one of the keys to doing that, as I've stated before, is for the U.S. and NATO to join together in building a global ballistic missile defense system that would be capable of neutralizing the nuclear arsenals of Russia and, by extension, China, North Korea, and Iran. And in that way, we would have a better chance of preserving the peace long term in Europe. So, and that's my initial take here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um, oh,
fantastic.
Steve, just quickly answering the question about Bakhmut and its significance is, you again, as I said before, you must see the map where Bakhmut is, and normally, for example, what Germans did during Second World War, when there was some resistance in, say, certain, say, village, they wouldn't fight to take over the village. They would just go left and right and just forget about this little village, which would be taken
And
a
they let the
week,
follow-up
months later.
infantry take care of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But in a situation with Bakhmut, if Russians will leave Bakhmut alone and will move left and right forward, then those forces will be immediately encircled from Bakhmut in the east and the other points in the west. So those Russian forces will be encircled and slowly destroyed. There will be no prisoners. Everybody will be killed. And Russians understand that. Ukraine understand that. And this is a strategic decision. You are right. The Bakhmut is itself has no importance whatsoever. It used
It's
to
just, yeah.
city of
Well,
8,000 people. Now it's probably less than 10. And there are some special units of Ukrainian army. The best units are now. It's like a fortress in a way.
Yeah.
It's,
well, I
it's
really
more fortress than
appreciate
Stalingrad in 1942. It's
thank you
more
so much.
fortress, so okay.
I wish this time with you guys has been so amazing. I want to come back and spend the whole 30 minutes with
Thank
you.
you, Steve.
And we will
Unfortunately,
welcome you.
I've got to run to another meeting. I'm on my feet till like 11 tonight. So it's just been a crazy day, but looking forward to being back maybe next week, Sasha. And
Thank you, Steve.
I want to thank you for having such a great show. And I just want to pray for the people of Ukraine and their democracy. And I really do say this with the bottom of my heart. I think there's a lot of similarities between George Washington and President Zelensky. And this man
You would welcome that comparison.
and he's an inspiration. He's an inspiration for how strong he has been. I get emotional talking about it because I think history will look back upon this time if they are successful, and we'll look back at this guy as the general, the president, and the only other analogy is Lincoln, who saved the Union. So, in the United States of America. But I want to thank Ukraine for fighting, and we stand with you. There's also a lot of Ukrainians in North Carolina, 24,000. Many of them are from NIPRO, which is the rocket science capital, and many of them are studying PhDs in artificial intelligence One of them is a guy named Misha Shevitz, who I'm going to bring on the show.
Okay,
And
very good.
yeah, but there are many in North Carolina. I spoke at the vigil. I was the keynote speaker, and they're all a lot of them are science and innovation, and they're very scared because their country is being destroyed. And so we have to also remember there's Ukrainians like Sasha Starr all over the world
That's true.
that are dealing with significant loss. And so, anyway, I just wanted to end with that passionate statement. But thank you all so
Thank you
much
very
for
much,
your time.
Steve.
Be safe. See you soon.
Thank you. See
Thank
you
you.
Thank you.
soon. Bye bye. Uh, what's interesting is that the questions that Russians were saying at the beginning of the war that Ukraine, basically, they're the same people, they're brothers and sisters, and most of the Ukrainians speak Russian language anyway. Most of them are Russian anyway, and others that are not Russians, they're deep inside, they are Russians, and so on. I I heard very interesting program a couple of days ago when one side, I think on YouTube, they had interviews, very short interviews, sort of like a question, what do you think about the war? With people in Moscow and people in Lviv, Ukraine. So in Moscow, people were saying, "Oh, life is the same as before. It's no problem. We're managing and so on and on and on." It was almost 100%. I think it was 100% answers. Now in Lviv, of course, the situation was very different. Lviv, people were complaining that this is horrible war. Most of them lost already some relatives or friends or so on, and they're worried about their children and at the end, there was interview in Lviv with a Ukrainian citizen who moved to Lviv from Kharkiv, and because he's a Russian native speaker, so interviewer told him that you can answer in Russian. He says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm learning Ukrainian. I know it well enough to answer your questions, and I hate Russian language, and I will never use Russian language again." And he answered in Ukrainian with great difficulties, but still he managed that. So Russians are doing almost impossible task to Ukrainization of the country, so all people will speak Ukrainian only. So if before it was divided, there were Ukrainian native speakers and Russian native speakers in the west of the country, right? At the end of the war, there will be no Russian speakers. Even those who are native Russian speakers, they will learn and they will talk in Ukrainian only. This is what genius of Mr. Putin did. Yeah.
It's a good survival strategy for those learning to speak Ukrainian.
Yes, I guess so. Actually, there are a few people I know personally in Toronto who avoid talking Russian, although they're native Russian speakers, like myself, for example. They avoid using Russian, so they speak either English or Ukrainian. Of course, English for them is much easier, but sometimes they switch to Ukrainian, but they refuse to use Russian, believe it or not. So now, very interesting article I've read in Foreign Affairs, one of the probably the latest number, which is talking about the astonishing endurance of unity on Ukraine. And okay, what they're basically saying, let me confirm. Ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, many analysts have worried about the durability of Western support for Kyiv. Not a week goes by without new reports of weakening resolve, war fatigue, or cracks in the coalition. Yet, a year into the conflict, the West's commitment to Ukraine is undiminished and, measured by aid delivered, stronger than ever. So, if we exclude these games which are played by Trump and his people, that once he'll be elected, there will be no help to Ukraine, period, which was echoed by one of his possible contenders, the Republican in Florida. What's his
DeSantis.
name? Oh, DeSantis. How could I forget? So DeSantis. So that's this genius pronounced about the same thing as Trump, and it's a minority even in Republican Party. Now, overall, in landscape of America, we can see unwavering support from almost all walks of life, from small businesses, from shopping centers, everywhere. You see a lot of Ukrainian flags everywhere, and there is not much difference in support for Ukraine in U.S. and in Europe, in all European countries, you see this even tennis tournament where almost everybody waving the Ukrainian flags. And look at what Wimbledon did. They allow Russian and Belarusian players to participate as long as they are not praising Mr. Putin and Russia, and they have to show their sympathy with Ukrainian people. That's a condition. You are either in or you're out. The end of story. So, John, what do you think? Is sport something what should be involved in political movements in society?
It's not whether sports should be involved. If you look back at before World War II and Nazi Germany and World War, sports has starting with the 20th century has especially been associated with politics, and the political leadership has basically tried to use sports as evidence of the inherent superiority of their particular nation. And that was why Nazi Germany wanted to host the Olympics in 1936. Of
Which they
course,
did.
yeah, and because uh, they did fairly well, but thanks to American athletes like Jesse Owens, well, it kind of blew away the myth of Aryan superiority.
Mhm.
But in any case, sports. You just have to accept it as a given that because no matter how much you might want to divide or divorce sports from politics, uh, our experience in the 20th century and the 21st century indicates that's never going to be the case. You're always going to have some element of politics or political sympathy or gamesmanship going on. So I don't give that much weight. But Ukraine, it's going to be just getting on the subject of Ukraine, the and political support. While it is possible that uh, should the Republican Party achieve victory in 2024, that it is possible that it might diminish. I predict that the Ukraine and its armed forces are going to render that consideration irrelevant because I believe that Ukraine is going to surprise both the West and Russia by unleashing a successful counteroffensive in the spring at a time of the Ukrainian leadership's choosing that that will put us on the road less to a decisive defeat of Russia in Ukraine and particularly in the Crimea. And mind you, I'm someone in the minority opinion in this case, but yeah, I contend that the Ukrainians have had a track record thus far of surpassing or exceeding the expectations of both the West and their Russian opponents. And I predict the same will happen this spring. And so that by the time you actually get around to the presidential campaigns in 2024, starting at the primaries and so forth, I predict that the Russian-Ukrainian war will become increasingly irrelevant to the outcome because the Ukrainians will be on the verge of driving Russia out of Ukraine completely, and that this will take place before the presidential elections of 2024.
hmm Actually, there are interesting comments by Mark Lee that the ancient Greeks and Romans. Now, I'm more familiar with the Greeks because when they held Olympic Games at that time, we're talking about 2,500 years ago, all which were at the time, they were all stopped for the time that Olympic Games were held. So all wars were stopped. So at that point, you could rely that Olympics had a very special meaning in the formation of societies. That even wars between the cities of ancient Greeks, which sometimes were very fierce and bloodthirsty, but they would stop in respect to the Olympic Games. Now, of course, in modern times, nothing of that happening. In fact, the tragedy in Munich, 1972, just show the barbarian side of the mm, people to the games and so on. I saw this famous movie Munich by Steven Spielberg, and mm, well, we know not only from the movie, but the fact that all of these people involved in this tragedies, they were all captured and killed one by one. And even that raised the question whether Israeli Mossad was right to do this, because it would be without any trial, just willful execution of maybe innocent people, because it was not proven in a court of law, and so on. But well, look, the war is a war, and the terrorist war is a terrorist war. And so, if somehow Ukrainians would mastermind some terrorist acts on Russian territory, in my opinion, it would be well justified. I'm not saying it should be done, or it could be even done. We don't know that, but it's a real war, and apparently, so far, Russians are don't fight by any rules, by any international agreements respecting the life of captured people, killing them. Um there are just so many war crimes have been already committed by Russians that you wouldn't even know where to start, and most of the people were committed much more than one act of terror and crime of war. That's an unfortunate thing about that. So right now we are still waiting for the Ukrainian attack. Most analysts believe that it will start probably first half of April. That they believe that it still should be the climate should get a little warmer. The mm, it will be easier for a ground attack. More West supplied weapons will reach Russia and would be available on the front lines. Russia, Ukraine is still lacking a lot of artillery units, and uh, that should be addressed too, and it is addressed. And more weapons, Ukrainians are trying to employ for fighting drones, and even old artillery or Zenit unit. Mm, howitzer from even from World War II. They're actually quite good for destroying this uh, drones, which are just they're not that dangerous, except that there are just too many of those flying, and so so most of them should be destroyed, and for that you need effective ammunition. Now, whereas Russian attack is concerned, there are some different opinions. Some of them, some analysts believe that it started sometime mid-January, and if it started, where is that? Except Bakhmut, we don't hear much of what's going on.
And right now, the Bakhmut is acting as as I've mentioned before, as a version of the Battle of Verdun in World War One. Unlike that battle, however, in which the casualties on both sides between the French and the Germans were roughly equal, and thus failing the German objective of bleeding the French white. Uh, what what has instead happened is that although the Ukrainians are certainly taking significant casualties, the Russians have taken a significantly greater casualties by a factor of some say 2 or 3 or 4 times, and it is bleeding the Russians white as far as their as far as their best remaining troops, and they're even running out of prisoners to throw in there. So, and I saw an article that now that they're sending female prisoners to the uh, to the front. Says, well, that is that. I'm sorry, that's not exactly they're bringing their strongest troops on. They're running out of options. And again, this is setting the Russians up for a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. The only mystery is really the timing and the scale. And but I do
and
believe that
direction.
and direction, yes. But I do believe that the Ukrainian counteroffensive, once it begins, will surprise both sides, and in the degree of success that it achieves.
I agree, Jonathan. It's very, very important not to rush the Ukrainian forces to enter offensive as soon as possible, tomorrow, next week, next 2 weeks or so. And it's very, very important. It's one in a lifetime opportunity to really get Russian army out of Ukraine. Now, very interesting development is happening that one analyst, which I respect a lot, he had opinion, and he voiced that opinion that to take Crimea is much easier than Donbas region, because Donbas region is fortified and it's been oversupplied and resupplied from Russia very. Whereas Crimea, if you look at it, and if the bridge, the Kerch bridge will be destroyed, of course, sooner or later once the attack will start, it cannot be resupplied easily. So if you cut off, let's see, you don't even have to go through Melitopol. You can go east of Melitopol and just cut completely by straight line when there are no Russian fortifications of any kind. You can go to Azov Sea right away, and then you cut in half all the Russian forces in Ukraine. But most importantly, you stop supply of Crimea from Russian forces, period. So therefore, it's just a matter of time when they will have to surrender, or they will have to, most of them will be killed. Anyway, so that's a very interesting development, because before many opinions were that Crimea is so important Russian stronghold, it's a Russian territory effectively, and it will upset Russians so much, and all this and that. And right now, they don't take these political considerations anymore at anything. They're saying, okay, here's Crimea, it's a part of Ukrainian territory. So here is a plan how we're going to liberated, and that's the end of story. No.
Well, a Ukrainian victory in Crimea, I agree with you that it is easier. It will be easier for the Ukrainians to cut off resupply of the Russian forces in Crimea. Then that would have a much more significant political and military impact than, for example, if the Russians manage to take over the entire city of Bakhmut, which it's already been indicated, the Ukrainians are simply building defensive lines to the west of that to contain even any potential takeover of Bakhmut. But right now, the Russians are simply running out of gas.
Yeah,
Both in manpower as well as actual gas.
absolutely actual gas and ammunition, and as they're using now the weapons of Second World War, and in some occasions First World War. So
yeah, it's just, you don't see this ending well for the Russians, and especially as I've mentioned before, even especially demographically after the war, they're going to have an even bigger problem preserving their population, or keeping their population decline from continuing in the years to come after the war is finished.
yeah.
So,
Well, we are going to see in the next few days what's happening there. Thank you so much for participating in today's program, and we'll
I
see you
didn't
on
want you to be
Friday.
here. I didn't want you to be here all alone talking to yourself.
Thank you. We'll have Ivan will join us back on
Great.
Friday. So looking forward to our next program. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you to all our listeners. Bye-bye. Slava Ukraini. Героям
До свидания.